Good evening. It's good to see all of you. Appreciate you being here for this opportunity tonight for us to discuss the water rate structure for the city. My name is Bill Riley. I'm the Water Utilities Director. I'd like to take just a minute to introduce some important people that we have here. First, Mayor Dwayne Morrison, appreciate you being here. Councilwoman Lucy Gonzalez, appreciate you being here. And Councilman Rodney Fleming, appreciate y'all being here. We've had last week a town hall meeting that Councilwoman Elizabeth Grindstaff had, and also Councilwoman Charlotte Farmer, and we had a good turnout there and had some really good discussion, and appreciate them holding that. They would be here tonight, but because of quorum purposes, they could not be here, along with Councilman Johnny Silvas and Marty Self. So we hopefully they are watching on TV, and I appreciate all of y'all being here and your interest in this issue that we're going to discuss tonight. We'd also like to introduce the City Manager, Daniel Valenzuela. Appreciate you being here as well. The city contracted with the firm of REVENUERATES Financial Consultants to help us think through this process, develop a financial plan, look at the challenges that the utility was facing, and figure out how we move forward in the future to meet the requirements of the utility financially and have a financially sustainable operation. And so what we've done is we have a presentation that they are going to present to you tonight. We have Mr. Rick Giardina and Rocky Crayley, both with REVENUERATES, and they will be presenting the results of that study and what we are proposing moving forward. And then once they are completed that, we'll open it up for any questions and have whatever dialogue that we need to have or you'd like to have as part of this process. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Giardina and let him present the results of the study.
Right. Thank you, Bill, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. This is the nearing finish line, if you will, of a process that's been going on for several months, has involved a large component of the community, the Water Advisory Board, and of course the staff of the city. And as Bill indicated, what I'd like to do tonight is take about 15 minutes or so and provide a summary of the process that we've used, the metrics, the key factors that have influenced this study, and then the results. Let me start with a little background of why a rate study. And this is something that is not done every year by a community, by a utility. This is something in a comprehensive manner that might be done every 3 to 5 years. And given some of the challenges facing the utility, now is the right time to undertake this. The typical practice that we see is during the budget cycle. Revenues are looked at, expenditures are looked at, and rates might be adjusted. The user charges that our customers pay might be adjusted, and typically these are done in an across-the-board manner. We might increase all of the rates 3%, just to meet our revenue requirement, our revenue needs. We might also implement new charges along the way to address a particular concern, a particular project funding need, for example. And so this is done primarily as a matter of expediency or convenience as part of the budget process. But as I mentioned, every 3 to 5 years it's important to take a comprehensive look and conduct a rate study to really determine on more than a single year basis, over a multi-year period, how much revenue is really needed to sustain the utility, to provide adequate service levels to the customers. The second question is really who should pay? And here we're talking about residential customers versus industrial, commercial, irrigation customers. And then the last question that's asked and answered as part of a formal rate study is how our customers should pay. Our customers pay through the monthly user charges that are assessed. So looking at the structure is a key element of a comprehensive rate study. So all three of these pieces were examined as a part of this study. This next slide shows the challenges faced by the utility. And many of these are common to utilities we see across the country. They have some specific challenges here with regard to San Angelo. The first is financial sufficiency. This is really generating enough revenue to cover our annual cost. Costs having to do with the operation and maintenance of the water and water reclamation systems, costs having to do with labor and the employees that we have, and then the most significant cost is the capital cost, the rehabilitation of facilities, the acquisition, the construction of new facilities. So it's ensuring that we have that financial sufficiency. The next one's referred to as sustainability, and this goes to what I mentioned earlier as targets. And we're going to get into a lot of detail of those financial targets to ensure that the utility is a viable entity. And this is critically important as we look at the capital needs and we start to look at raising capital to fund the facilities and the needs of the community on a going forward basis. Water supply. Really ensuring that we have a reliable, stable supply of water for the community. And having experienced the recent droughts, the droughts we're in all likelihood still in, I think many of you are aware of that. And this is perhaps the single largest capital expenditure that we're facing. And then lastly, what we call capital reinvestment. San Angelo, like most utilities across the country, are wrestling with an aging system. And so as we talk about the 5-year financial plan tonight, in 5 years we're not going to solve that. The system will continue to age, much like our own automobiles or homes. And the reinvestment is a critical important aspect of this to ensure that we're able to, on a long-term sustainable basis, provide service level to our community, to meet the growing demands and concerns, to meet the economic opportunities that San Angelo might have. I'm going to talk for a moment about the financial challenges of the utility. And this first slide looks at the revenues of the utility. And here what we're seeing is a comparison of budgeted revenue to actual revenue. And you can see that our actual revenue has come in year after year less than we've budgeted. And this is primarily, if not exclusively, the product of water conservation, of the drought that we've been experiencing, and our customers cutting back on the amount of water that they've used. And our revenues then are less than anticipated. Well, the real issue there has to do with less revenue. We must then try to reduce cost. And in doing that, the utility has in fact reduced its spending. That's not a long-term solution though, because what that really does is, in many respects, kick the can down the road and defer maintenance, cut other initiatives that are critical to maintaining the service and sustainability of the utility. But this is a good illustration of the reduction in expenditures that the utility has made a conscious effort to achieve in the face of declining revenues, trying to cut costs. And then this next slide is a comparison of actual expenses, revenue, and then what we call the fund balance. And you can think of the fund balance in terms of your savings or checking account. This is the amount of money that we have to deal with unexpected circumstances or situations. And you can see, and I'm going to highlight on the board here, this black bar is our fund balance, and you can see the decline in this fund balance from $4.5 million in 2012 to today at $300,000, and based on year-to-date actual results, it's even less than that. And a good financial target for the utility would be a balance of $3.8 million. So essentially, because we've had the decline in revenues and we've tried to, as best we can, reduce cost, we've been eating into our savings and checking account and reducing that fund balance. And in our opinion, reducing that to levels that are really below an acceptable target for a utility of this nature, for a utility with these kinds of expenditures. So these challenges then are manifested in terms of developing a financial plan. and looking at what our revenue levels should be in order to put us in a sustainable position going forward. And I'd like to share that information with you, starting with our key assumptions. And what we refer to here as annual operating position is really the desire to have our annual revenues meet or exceed our annual expenditures. And as I showed you on the earlier slides, we have not been in that position. Our expenditures have exceeded our revenues, and we've been drawing down our fund balance or our checking account. But our goal here is to ensure that on an annual basis we're generating enough revenues to cover our costs. Something we refer to as days cash on hand. This is working capital. We provide services and incur expenditures in advance of receiving revenue from our customers. So it's important to have a reasonable level of days cash on hand. And our target here is a 75-day target. This is generally consistent with what we see in terms of metrics or practices used by other utilities across the country. And when we look at positioning the utility to go out and approach the capital market to borrow money to undertake the capital needs in the plan, this is a metric that's going to be critically important. Those that lend money will look at a metric like this in terms of providing a rating. And the rating agencies that assess the creditworthiness of the city and the utility will look at this metric, and we've seen, frankly, metrics much higher than what we're showing here. But we believe 75 days, given the circumstances here in San Angelo, is reasonable. So we've developed the financial plan around that 75-day target. And then lastly is what we refer to as a debt service coverage ratio. This is a measure of our ability to repay what we borrow. You see here our goal of 1.2 times debt service. Essentially what this means is that for every dollar of debt service that we have to pay, and the debt service is the equivalent of the mortgage that you might have on your home, for each dollar of debt service that we pay each year, we need to have $1.25 of available revenue. This ensures that we can repay those that loan us money. And again, the $1.25 or the 1.25 times coverage. This is an industry metric and one that the capital markets look very closely at in assessing the creditworthiness of a borrower. So our financial plan is really built around these three metrics. Do we generate enough revenue to cover our costs? Do we have enough working capital to deal with uncertainties? Are we liquid enough in capital terms? And then do we have the ability to repay what we borrow? One of the most important factors in determining how much revenue we need is our capital plan. And I mentioned the desire to secure a long-term water supply. I also talked about renewal and rehabilitation. So when we look at water and the water reclamation utility, here we've summarized some of the significant capital needs on a going forward basis. Water main replacements, treatment plant improvements, and so forth. But the single most significant challenge we have as a community is our long-term water supply. And this has been built into the financial plan. A specific project has not been identified, but we know that as a community we need to do something very, very soon. And so we've built into the plan for the next fiscal year a water supply project. And that's the most significant capital driver that we have. We cannot be a sustainable community on a going forward basis if we do nothing. This next slide is a graphic illustration on a timeline of some of our key expenses. And what I've shown here on the lower portion of this slide are some of the existing obligations that we have that are going to go away. And we've considered these in the financial plan. We have some final payments on the Ivy Reservoir that are shown here over the next several years. We also have a final payment on the Twin Buttes. And these dollar amounts, while significant, truly pale in comparison to some of the new capital obligations that we're going to have, and other expenses as well. And those are shown here on the top portion of the chart. As I mentioned, we have the need for a new water supply project, and we've estimated that amount at approximately $130 million in terms of a debt issue. So the intention is for the community, for the city, to approach the capital markets to look at borrowing $136 million. The first payment on that debt will be in 2018 and will continue for 20 or 30 years into the future. So this is a key element of the water supply, of solving the water supply challenge, and a key element of the financial plan going forward, and a key driver in the need to get to that point, as I said earlier, of generating enough revenues to cover our cost, and doing so in a manner that, again, sustains the long-term water supply of the community. So in developing the financial plan, we wanted to look at all revenue sources that would be available. And on the top portion of this slide, we're showing some additional revenues that could come in from the landfill, as well as the utilization of the 1/2 cent sales tax revenue, starting at $1 million next year, and then increasing to $2.45 million in the future. So before we even started to look at raising revenues through a rate increase, we wanted to specifically look at other revenue sources that were available, and these two were identified. Once we've done that, that is not enough to fund that additional debt service associated with the bond issue or the borrowing. Not enough to fund the incremental O&M that we're going to have. Not enough to fund the renewal and rehabilitation. So there will be the need for what we call water user charge adjustments, increases in the amount of revenue in both the water utility and the water reclamation utility. And those are illustrated here in terms of increases in 2016, 2018, and then in future years as well. And increases as well on the bottom of this chart, across the board increases for reclamation rate adjustments. Okay. This evening we're not going to go into the specific details of the rate structure. That information has been presented in prior meetings, but we wanted to focus on the overall revenue increases and then the impacts that we would anticipate to see on a typical customer. More on the financial plan. What this chart shows for the water utility on the left and the water reclamation utility on the right, the blue bar represents our projected expenditures, our projected cost of providing service. The orange line, the more flat line, represents the revenues that we expect if we do nothing. And you can see very quickly how our expenditures exceed our revenues if we do nothing. It's not a sustainable position. The yellow line is a projection of the revenues we would achieve under the financial plan and the revenue increases that are proposed. It puts us in that position of annually generating revenue equal to or slightly above our expenditures, our cost. Our second metric was that working capital or cash on hand metric. And the horizontal line, the orange line here, shows our target in terms of the dollars of cash reserves that we should have. And the blue bar shows that average fund balance under the proposed financial plan. And you can see for water on the left, by the time we get to 2020, we're right at our target. It takes us a few years to get there, but we're right at that target. For water reclamation, we're above our target in each and every year. So the real driver for the increase in revenues from water reclamation is not our cash balances. It's the next metric, debt service coverage. Again, water on the left, reclamation on the right. The horizontal line represents our 1.25 times coverage, that $1.25 that we need. And you can see today we're not there on water. We're barely there on water reclamation. And over the planning period through 2020, we exceed or meet that coverage requirement for water. For water reclamation, the need for the revenue increases, the need for additional revenue is driven by this coverage requirement, and in 2020 we're virtually at that coverage requirement. So these graphs show that the proposed financial plan meet the financial metrics, the financial targets that have been deemed to be appropriate. And appropriate in the sense of positioning again the city to borrow money for that water supply project and other capital needs. We have to be viewed as an attractive credit to those who want to loan us money. Much when you're applying for a mortgage and your credit rating is looked at. The city's credit rating is closely scrutinized as we're looking to borrow over $100 million to sustain our long-term water supply. So what's the impact on our customers of the proposed financial plan, the borrowing, the projected revenue needs? This table shows in summary fashion the combined water and water reclamation bill for a typical residential customer using 4,000 gallons of water per month. And you can see today that customer pays approximately $51 for both of those services, water and water reclamation. Under this plan, the first year increase would increase that bill, that combined total bill, by under $6 per month, $5.88 per month. But in order to meet those metrics over the 5-year study period, there will be future revenue increases that are needed, and those are shown on this chart. Taking the average monthly bill from just over $50 to $57 in the first year, and then just under $80 per month. I may have misspoken. I may have said per year. Per month for a typical residential customer. For customers that use more than 4,000 gallons per month, I think we could expect somewhat higher increases in, of course, dollars and percent. A customer using less than 4,000 gallons per month would likely see a lower increase. The average residence in San Angelo does use 4,000 gallons per month. Okay? But again, that's just an average. We do have customers that use more than that and customers that use less than that. But this financial plan is intended to accomplish those goals and objectives that we've talked about, that in summary shown here really address the increases in expenses that are needed and provide the revenue to put us on the right path of meeting the appropriate financial metrics, that support some future water supply project, that put us on a long-term solution with regard to meeting the water demands in the community today and the community tomorrow. And then supports the investment in infrastructure, not just the water supply. But this is a very capital-intensive operation that we have. It's true of any water utility. As a matter of fact, when you look at electric, natural gas, and water utilities and water reclamation utilities, of those three are the most capital-intensive utilities in terms of the amount of capital that is needed to provide the service to the customer. So this financial plan we consider a sustainable plan. It puts the utility on the right, proper path for being a financially sound operation, and provides the investment and the reinvestment that's necessary for a sustainable community, for a community that can stand up and speak to the fact that they have a long-term reliable water supply and are able to deal with the water reclamation issues on a long-term basis as well. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions that you might have with regard to the financial plan. Both Bill Riley and myself are available. And we'd ask if you could use the microphone as well so that our viewing audience can hear the question.
I noticed in your presentation, and you touched on it at the beginning, but I wanted to ask to make sure I understood. The entire thing seems to be based on and represented on residential rates. Can you address commercial rates, please?
Absolutely. That's a great question. We focus on residential because probably 80% of the accounts we serve are residential. The increases that we were showing, and let me just go back to that slide. The increases that we're showing for residential, you can expect very similar increases for our commercial, business, irrigation-only customers as well. This process conducted what we called a cost of service study to look at the demands that each of those customer groups place on the system and then the associated cost of meeting those demands. And all of our customers will see increases in their rates going forward over this 5-year period, and they will be on the order of magnitude that we're showing here for our residential customers. Any other questions or comments about what we've shared with you?
Excuse me. Let me kind of point out a couple of things that we've talked about in the past, and just to kind of reiterate some of the things that Rick has said. This community has done a tremendous job of conservation. When it was extremely important, the community stepped up and begin to reduce water usage. And you can't say enough good about that. And that has continued. We've seen through 2015 the same usage patterns that we saw in 2014 when the community was in a drought stage 2. And so I think that reflects an attitude of this community of being very conscientious of their water usage. The situation, though, or the reality with that is that a utility, as Rick was pointing out, is very capital intensive and extensive, and it's a fixed cost operation. And so we have large capital costs. We have large operational costs associated with delivering water, treating water, and then putting that water out to the customers. Those don't go away. Those costs don't go away when the demand drops. And so unfortunately, we still have those costs that the utility is facing. We also have the need, as Rick pointed out, to continue to look for and develop additional water supplies. I don't think it's a mystery to anybody in this community that our water supplies are very vulnerable, as we've seen the lakes decline. And so we have to continue to look for water supply and develop new alternatives and alternative strategies as part of the portfolio. And so that's going to be critical to this community. We also have a lot of aging infrastructure. And I think, again, this community is very aware of that and the need to reinvest into the infrastructure in this community. And so those things are facing this community. They're real, and we think that we've developed a strategy for moving forward to address those issues. But I want to point out that it's not a one-year deal. We saw this was a 5-year plan, and it takes that 5 years to get to the financial sustainability point that was developed and was shown here as part of the financial plan. So we will be addressing that issue with the council. I believe the plan is to take that back to them at their meeting on December 1st and the 15th. And so we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to, gave the community an opportunity to come and address these issues, to talk about this. So not that it's over. If anybody has any additional questions, please stand up and ask those, and we'll do our best to answer them.
So you're not necessarily saying that nothing's going to happen for the next 4 years until we hit that 5-year mark? That's not what you meant to say.
I did not mean to say that. What I'm saying is that it takes 5 years, the rate increase is a 5-year plan to get to the financial sustainability, to meet the financial targets.
Pipe replacement, investigating water sources, all that stuff?
All that takes place now, begins now, correct.
Okay. I understand.
It's underway, actually.
So we're kind of more or less funding in the hole while we work our way out of the hole.
That's correct. as you can see from the financial plan with what's happening with the fund balance, if we don't do anything, then that changes what we can do, obviously. As the fund balance begins to drop and continues to drop, there has to be costs, cutting. There will not be any additional water supply. It would actually impact service levels. So, I think that was clear in the presentation.
So carrying out that logic now, I don't mean to drag this.
That's good. That's good.
I don't mean to drag this into anything in particular, but as we go over the next 4 years, give or take, as we build up our reserves and get back into a positive situation, we are at the same time working out of the hole that we have now and is going to continue. So how does our increased revenue make up that difference in the hole that we're digging over that 4 years? I didn't catch that part of your charts. How do we maintain what we're losing?
At the end of 5 years, I don't think either of us would say we've fixed the problem. And in this context, I'm talking about the problem being capital and infrastructure investment. That will continue to be a need for this system going forward. But what this plan does, and in a very specific way, turns that fund balance deficit around by generating excess cash. We're going to be borrowing money, $130 million. And we must maintain that 1.25 coverage. So of that 1.25, 1 of that goes to pay the debt service. The 0.25, that's one of the tools we have for helping to increase our fund balance. That money over and above our debt service can go to the bottom line into that checking or savings account. It can also be used for, to a small degree, cash funding some of our capital needs. So between the revenue increases, which generate additional revenue, between the 0.25 difference between our coverage, we will begin to generate more cash and get us up to that 75-day target that we have. Okay? So when I talk about having rates that recover or that reflect cost of service, a component of that, in addition to our labor, our chemicals, our power, our debt service, is another piece of that is building the fund balance. So we're proposing revenue increases, rate increases, that cover all of those real costs, but it's also a real cost in terms of generating adequate revenues to add to build up our fund balance. So that's built into the revenue projections and the revenue needs to get to that 75-day target, which we're far behind on water now. As you saw, we're in much better shape on water reclamation. But water reclamation needs revenue increases to meet their debt service coverage requirement, that 1.25. So it's a little different on the two utilities, but the overall goal is the same. Meet those 3 financial metrics and not get there overnight, because we didn't get in the hole we're talking about overnight. So we're proposing a phase-in plan to get us there by that end of the 5-year period. Doesn't mean in years thereafter there will not be the need for revenue increases. Our system will continue to age, and we'll still be out there with pipeline replacement, for example. And so there will be revenue increases even beyond the 5 years. And this is, again, not unique to the city of San Angelo. Communities across the country, and you've probably heard about this much like you heard about the infrastructure crisis we have on roads and bridges. Well, we have an infrastructure crisis in water and water reclamation as well. Anything else? Okay, great.
This $136 million, I think is in this brochure, is for some future project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That we're basing some of these rates, or these rates are based on that?
Yes, they are.
Okay, there's no plan in effect for that. Is that correct?
There is a plan. The council has not made a decision on the direction of that plan, but there is a plan that that number is based on.
Okay.
Several plans.
Huh?
There's several, we've got to decide.
Right. Well, I'll just say I object to paying this until a plan is in place, as far as that's concerned. Because that might come next year, it might not. Anyway, as far as that, I don't think that ought to be in this rates until we have a plan in place. The other thing, there's $1.8 million from the landfill. What is that?
That was I guess that was a payment from Republic as part of the landfill, ultimately, I guess, closing landfill. And somebody else might need to speak to the actual specifics of that. The council voted to take $1.8 million of that and put in the water fund to help the water fund.
Okay, because I think that was $2.5 million.
I'm not sure what the total was. Is that correct? That's correct.
But that came from that part, that
That's correct.
1.8 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then on one other thing on the rates, in looking at the rates for residents like me, well, y'all are using these typical family or typical rates, $70. I don't know where you get those figures. I mean, I'm a single man with a dog, and I use $4,000 through my, at least every month through my house meter, and then I've got a landscape meter that can be, depends on when it is. So I don't know where this my bills average probably $150 a month.
Right.
Okay. So a 50% increase over those few years is going to be quite a bit more than the typical family. Now, notice the rates on residents seem to be a little bit punitive, and that we're in block rates on the residents, and at 39,000 gallons, then it jumps to a $9 rate, okay? Commercial businesses have flat rate, stays at 4 or something, and then I believe at 90,000 gallons jumps up to that higher rate, okay? Anyway, I don't think that's fair.
You want to speak to the inverted rate?
Yes. There's a couple thoughts behind that. I mentioned the cost of service study that we complete as part of this process. And so those rates are a reflection in part of that cost of service. And let me give you a quick example. Some of the most significant costs that the utility incurs is associated with meeting peak demand. And that's the summertime use. You mentioned outdoor irrigation use. That's a use that occurs in the months of, let's just say, May through September. And so the utility has to invest in facilities to meet that demand for those 4 or 5 months. Those facilities then sit idle the rest of the year. We oversize our pipes to meet that summertime demand. Most of the summertime demand comes from residential customers. Their use, as you illustrated, is very low in the winter, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 gallons, but then it might grow.
Winter rates for commercial businesses and summer rates, I've noticed on these fees, our schedule, but.
Yes.
Okay, but they have it, their demand goes up as much as my demand goes up. I've got trees and grass, and they've got that they're watering with their landscape, right?
Actually, it doesn't. The commercial class, as a general rule, their peaking is much less than single family because they don't have as much outdoor use. For those that have large outdoor use, they typically have a separate irrigation meter. And it's through that meter that they would pay higher rates. Okay. The second element of this is trying to create an incentive for residential customers to use water efficiently. And that's the essence behind that block structure that you referred to. Right. That as we get customers that use more and more water, we're trying to incentivize them to use less.
Well, why don't we incentivize the hotels and the other businesses to do that too?
Most businesses have a built-in incentive. and it's called profit.
Right, and if you
And so
block up
they-
their rates and get them higher, they will conserve water too.
And so they typically don't waste near as much water. And when they're using water indoors, they don't have near the amount of waste that we see for outdoor irrigators. And so the focus tends to be a lot more on the outdoor use. And hence that inclining block rate structure, that block rate structure for residential, and higher unit prices for irrigation, outdoor use, what's typically deemed the discretionary use.
Well, I've got a landscape meter, and y'all combine, my landscape meter is combined with my household meter to figure my rates, okay? For commercial businesses, you have a flat rate for them, and then you have a flat rate for outside watering, for their landscape meters, okay? Why would their rate be at $4.66 for the first 89,000 gallons, but my rates change at 39,000 gallons and go up to that high rate? Not that I'm going to use that much, but I might creep over the 40,000. I've done that before in real bad weather, and I'm sure there's a lot of other residents in this town, if you go to Southland and Bentwood and whatnot, that are using a whole lot more than I am. You bump, it looks very punitive to me.
Intended to provide that incentive, even at $4.89 for the irrigation meter, and that could be an irrigation meter for a homeowners association, for an apartment complex, for a commercial building that has a lot of irrigation. There's incentive built in there for them as well. But the industry, the experience has been that the commercial side doesn't need as much incentive. In the simplest of terms, they don't need as much incentive because they have that profit motivation. And so they're very sensitive to and concerned about every gallon that they use.
Okay. Well, I don't know if their profit motivation is any more than my just survival. Let's see. No Social Security raise this year. Okay. My income is Social Security and oil and gas. Oil and gas is down half. So I'm looking to save money too on things. And we're selling water. A gallon of water ought to cost me the same thing it costs somebody else, some other business, whatever. It shouldn't be something that this group gets more or less, or we're going to pick on the residents and punitize them as far as outside landscape watering, whereas not a commercial business. I mean, we're all citizens in this and all taxpayers, and we're paying the water bills. Why should I have to pay more for, say, 50,000 gallons of water than a motel down the street?
Well, that's a direct reflection of the cost of service. And again, I'll go back to most of our commercial enterprises and industrials are using roughly the same amount of water every day of the year, every month of the year. And so their demand curve is very flat. But our residential class, and whether it's San Angelo or Dallas or El Paso, the residential class is always the most expensive class to serve. And that's because of those peak demands that occur in the summertime. And it's just, I hate to say it this way, it's just a simple fact when we look at the demands that classes place on the system. It's not that every customer should pay the same. The cost of service principle and the standard that we must follow is every customer should pay the cost to serve them. And a customer who peaks is more expensive to serve than a customer who has a uniform demand or a lower peaking demand. And whether, again, it's San Angelo or Dallas, I can go to almost any community, and I will tell you, having done this for 35 years, the most expensive class to serve is first irrigation, then single-family residential. And the least expensive class to serve is industrial and commercial because they use water in such a uniform fashion. And so our rates are a reflection of that.
I can't see that I'm not that more expensive to service when I hit 40,000 gallons versus one of them that hits 90,000 gallons. You look at those rates, I mean, they jump from $4.99, it goes up to 16 to 40,000 gallons, to $9.13. Why don't you add some more brackets then? You can't tell, you can tell me, I guess, but it's that much more expensive to service my residents.
It's a combination of, yes, it is more expensive to serve, and as you've observed, creating an incentive. And quite frankly, we have a relatively low percent of our residential customers that go into those upper blocks. We have
Really?
some, but it's a relatively low percent.
That's pretty surprising. I say I don't do it. I was looking back at my records, and back in 2011 and so, when it was really hot and I was trying to keep my trees and everything alive, I hit nearly 50,000 gallons 2 months. Okay, that's gonna, and I'm gonna do it to keep my plants alive. But you're gonna hit me if I have to do that again with increased rates that these other people that are not paying, and I just don't think that's fair. I think at least we ought to have a little bit more brackets and not jump it up quite as quick. Another thing is, this is off of this, but is the city looking at anything about population growth and control? I mean, what are we doing? We're getting ready to pay for, you've got $136 million in trying to find something for future water use, but we're not doing anything about the population. All these hotels and motels, they're consuming a lot of water. Are we doing anything like that, or is it just?
I don't know too many communities that have anything to do with, that have policies in place for population control. People go where they have the best opportunity for their families, and that's the truth anywhere. The way that we address that is, again, to address our future needs. And this is something that is in place with this plan. So even with our growth in projections, what we're trying to do is make sure that we secure the water that we need into the future based on what we project as the growth for the city. So as far as policies to say that we would limit how many people come in, no, we don't have that. I really don't know any community really that has that in place.
So, well, we need to think about that because we do have limited water resources, and even if we build this $136 million plant you're talking about, that's going to run out. Yeah. And there are places, in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado has green zones and areas. They've limited their population growth. I mean, there are things that can be done. I know a lot of people think growth is great, but it's not necessarily. In particular, when out here where we're running out of water. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll just make a couple of comments on the ones on the block rate structure for residential. There's a real, besides the issues that Rick raised that have to do with the actual cost of providing that service, there's also, if we had a flat rate, and those rates are based on what the overall cost, it costs the utility to provide that amount of water. And if we had one rate, it wouldn't be an attractive rate. It would have to be several dollars, $1,000 more than what the lower tier is. By having the block rate, it gives individuals an opportunity to control their bill a little bit by controlling their water usage. And those that choose to use it in the higher blocks pay that cost for providing it costs to provide that water. The other issue is on the project that was built into this rates. Again, it's a 5-year plan. That projected debt service does not start until 2018. The council will have, if they adopt the rates and the 5-year plan beginning in 2016, they'll have the next year to take a look at what's happening financially, and then the next year before that would ever, so they have plenty of opportunity to adjust that rate structure or that 5-year plan based on whatever direction is taken for future water supply.
Okay. And I don't guess there's any way to get y'all to change as far as building out on sprinkler systems, instead of combining it all under the.
Could I get you to use the microphone so the people at home can hear you?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. Anyway, bill each meter out, the house meter and the sprinkler system separately with the block rates.
Well,
the challenge there is that when we look at the cost of service for residential, it's the cost to provide both irrigation and domestic use. And so it makes sense to combine that, and the block thresholds of the structure are designed with irrigation use in mind. So that customer that uses 4,000 gallons on average, we absolutely know they're using more than that for irrigation. And that's reflected in the cost of service and those block thresholds as designed. Okay? And as Bill said, if we did a uniform rate for residential, one price for all water used, what that would do, that would subsidize customers who irrigate, and it would overcharge customers who don't. And so by disaggregating the rate structure and having these blocks, the first block or two are really a reflection of the cost of providing indoor service. And then on average, and residential customers are much more homogeneous than non-residential, so then on average, that's a proper reflection of that indoor use. But then as they move through those block thresholds and use more and more water, that then is discretionary irrigation use, and there's a higher cost associated with that. So it's really an attempt through the residential structure to provide equity to those to provide equity for indoor use and outdoor use. And outdoor use being the discretionary part of it is what we're going to be using, is what we're going to be meeting that demand with some water supply project. And that marginal cost, that future cost, is very, very high. And I might even go so far as to say it's higher than even the upper block rate that we have on that scale. So that irrigation use is a reflection of future supply acquisition. It's a reflection of an attempt to incentivize customers to use water more efficiently. That's sort of a long answer to your question about the separation, but it's important to look at the class in total.
Okay. Well, of course, I don't know. I think block rates for some of the commercial uses or landscape meters and so forth would probably encourage conservation too.
Well, there is a block rate, but it just doesn't.
Well, it goes up, it starts at 90,000.
Right, and that's based on the usage
Right.
patterns. Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
We did hear a little while ago also that the situation isn't unique to San Angelo. This is an issue across the United States. The American Society of Civil Engineers did a study recently it actually did a report card for the whole United States on the water and wastewater as far as the infrastructure needs. And the report card that came back was a D rating. That's Delta, D as in Delta. And that's one step away from failing. They project that there's about $1.3 trillion need for replacement of all these lines. What we're doing right now as a community is not sitting back and saying we have this problem. We know we have this problem, and we're trying to come up with a solution that will work. And this is why we're trying to move forward with the presentation that we have today. The City Council sees the importance. Now, even the $1.3 trillion need across the country, that doesn't address acquiring more water. So ours is, we have a bigger need. It's not just the replacement of the infrastructure, but it's also where do we find more water? Where do we bring that water in from and make sure that we have a plan in place? And again, this isn't unique to San Angelo. This is an issue that's being faced throughout the whole country, but we definitely are trying to do something to make sure that we address the needs, not just for the citizens right now that live here, but our children and our children's children. So again, we know that we wanted to make sure that we gave you an opportunity to address your concerns. This is something that the City Council members knew was really important that we heard from you, and we're thankful for all your thoughts and questions. Also, if you have any other questions for those of you that are viewing from home, please feel free to contact us at City Hall and ask those questions, because we want to make sure that you're clear on what we're trying to do and why it's really necessary at this point to get this done. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you again. Appreciate everybody being here. And again, if you have any additional questions, please let us know. I'd like to hear from you. Thank you.